Hi friends, welcome back to Liz's Reading Corner. I'm Liz and I like books. Today I thought I would quickly go through all of the books that I read in November, which was 18. I had an average star rating of 3.8 stars. I had 6 5-star reads, all of them right at the start of November, so I think that kind of just set the rest of the month up for just a big reading month. I wouldn't normally read this many books, even outside of uni semesters or trimesters as we're going into. I wouldn't normally read this many books, but I just had so many books that I couldn't put down that I ended up reading a lot more than I usually do. The first book that I finished was Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. I gave this 5 stars. I don't think anyone's surprised by this. I'm pretty sure I've mentioned this book a few times at this stage. I really enjoy it. This is going to be one of the series that I'm going to be finishing next year, along with a few others. I enjoyed it. I love the world building in this book. I love the way that Robin Hobb writes. I've said it all before, 5-star read. Like I said, no one's surprised. The second book I read was Then She Was Gone by Lisa Jewell. This was also a 5-star read. I didn't expect to like this as much as I did. Lisa Jewell is probably going to be one of those go-to authors that I just read everything that she writes. I loved this book so much. Like I said, even the evil, like the villain, the chick that's meant to be like the bad guy, I even felt sorry for her. And it's very rare to find an author who can write a villain that feels like a person that you can actually feel sorry for. I think if you enjoy Alice Feeney, Catriona Ward, Riley Sager, I think if you haven't already read any of Lisa Jewell's books, then you will enjoy them as well. The next book I finished was, this was a reread actually, so it was The Chalkman by C.J. Tudor. I have, again, many times already said how much I love C.J. Tudor's books. All of her books are just amazing to me. I don't think there's one book that I haven't enjoyed. At the very least, I don't think I've given her anything lower than a 4-star. I think that might have been for The Drift, if I remember right, because there were a few moments in that book where it was a bit flat. But anyway, The Chalkman is amazing. If you love horror, thriller, mystery, kind of like murder mystery, not even, horror and thriller, I would say this book is, it's very twisty-turny, and it's well worth the read. The next book that I finished was Good Bad Girl by Alice Feeney. I gave this one 5 stars because I could not pick the twist in this. I couldn't pick the end, and if I can't pick the end in a book, it's almost automatically 5 stars. It was also a book that I read in like less than a day because I just couldn't put it down because I really enjoyed it. The twist I didn't see coming. I saw part of the twist coming because she made it very obvious, but like the major twist at the end of the book, I couldn't pick it. Again, if you like Lisa Jewell, Catriona Ward, Riley Sager, you will enjoy Alice Feeney and any of Alice Feeney's books. The next book I finished is another reread. This is one of my favorite horror stories, and extremely underrated. I don't think enough people talk about this. Sorry, it was Needful Things by Stephen King, and I think it is one of his most underrated books ever. Like when people do lists of Stephen King books that they found like creepy or good, or just like lists of Stephen King books, it's just always left out. I have a feeling it is because it is such a big book, because it's such a long book, because the version that I read was, I think, 982 pages long. The original version that I had when I was younger, because I've been rereading this every couple of years since I was about 12, was over 1,000 pages. And so I think people just find it very intimidating, but it's worth the read, in my opinion. It's my favorite Stephen King book, and it makes me really sad that people don't give it the recognition that it deserves. The next book that I finished was One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. This is the first book in the Shepherd King series, or a duology. I can't remember if it's a trilogy or a duology, but it was good. I gave this one 5 stars as well. I was kind of on the fence because I had seen a lot of people, it seems to be like one of those books where either you really, really like it or you really, really hate it. And there doesn't seem to really be anything in between. I enjoyed it, obviously. I gave it 5 stars. So I plan to hopefully read the next one. It depends on whether the library has it available for reservation. But I'll see. If not, I'll be buying the books anyway, let's be honest. I plan on rereading this one a few times. The next book that I finished was The Lost Library by Rebecca Stead. I gave this 4 stars. This is a middle grade book, but it is beautiful. It is, I would say, a comfort read as an adult. It's a book about a library that was burnt down under suspicious circumstances. They don't know how the fire started. They obviously have suspicions as to who it was. I'm not going to add spoilers because I don't like spoilers. Unless I'm doing a deep dive on a book, I won't ever actually have spoilers, but there would be spoiler alerts. But this book has a cat who thinks that it is the protector of the library, and it's just about a town that comes together to essentially rebuild their library, but not in the way that you think. But it's a very cozy read. It's very obviously a book for children, but it's just one of those like cozy books that I'm pretty sure I'm going to end up buying that one as well. The next 2 books that I finished are, I believe, linked. So I finished the Traveling Cat Chronicles by Hiro Arakawa. I gave that one 3 stars. It was a really cute read. I loved reading it. I love cats. I'm a crazy cat lady. Just for all of those people out there that don't know me. I would have all of the cats if I could, but unfortunately we can't. And so I thought that I would love this, and I did, but also this one felt a little bit flat for me. I don't know if it's just the translation because it was originally written in Japanese and translated, but it just, I don't know, some of it just felt a little bit average. But then I also finished The Goodbye Cat, which I believe is the sequel to the Traveling Cat Chronicles, which is also by Hiro Arakawa. And I gave this one 4 stars. The first story, so this is a collection of short stories, 4 different short stories, I believe, from memory. And the first story reminded me of my old chap. So I had a cat who we had to have put down when he was 17 years old, and the first story just reminded me so much of him, and it made me cry. The other 3 stories were also very beautiful stories, but that first one really set the tone of the book for me, and so the other 3 didn't quite meet the expectations that I had for the book. I think it probably would have been a 5-star read if that first story had been last, but it wasn't, and so unfortunately the other 3 stories in the book just weren't as good. But I did love it. It was again another comfort read, and it has gotten me into reading more books about cats. The next book that I finished was The Shadow Glass by Rin Chipeko. This is book 3 of the Bone Witch trilogy, and I was actually disappointed. I gave it 4 stars because I was already in love with the characters. I had already fallen in love with the story from the previous 2 books, but this one, it almost felt like a forced book. Like they had to write this to tie up all of the loose ends rather than a book that wanted to be written, and so a lot of the story just felt a bit average, and a lot of the writing just felt like it had to be there, and so it was a bit disappointing. But I love the way that the story wrapped up. It's just the writing of the book let it down. The next book I finished was Inkblood, Sister Scribe by Emma Torres. I only gave this 3 stars. I think with this book, I really fed into the hype of it. A lot of the people that I follow on Instagram and that I watch on YouTube really, really loved this book, and I really, really wanted to love this book, but it just, I don't know, the story was there. The idea behind the story is everything that I would have wanted out of a book about books, but it just, I don't know, it wasn't right. And yeah, the writing just fell flat, and the story just didn't feel right. The villain didn't feel like a villain. All of the characters felt just very, or all of the characters in the story, all of the people in the story just felt very two-dimensional and very flat, and just not, I don't know if it's just me, but they just didn't feel like they had any personality, and it was just a big disappointment for me. So the next book I finished was Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo. I don't know that I'm going to finish this trilogy by Leigh Bardugo. That's probably going to disappoint a few people. I do have 6 of Crows to read. That's going to be one of my next reads, I think. But Shadow and Bone was just not it for me. I didn't enjoy it. It just was disappointing. I don't know. I can't explain why. Maybe because, it could be because I was kind of on a little bit of a book hangover from The Shadowglass and Inkblood, Sister Scribe, and so that sort of fantasy genre was a little bit like I needed to kind of get away from it. And I may end up rereading it next year and see how I feel, if I feel any differently then. But right now, it was not a good book. It was not a bad book. It was just an average book. And yeah, 3 stars. The next book I finished was The Prem by Joe Hill. This was a short story. I've kind of avoided Joe Hill as an author because even though I know he's not his father, he still writes very similar to Stephen King, and I'm kind of a little bit worn out because I've been reading Stephen King books for over 20 years, and so because I've just been reading them for so long, I just kind of need something else. But this was a nice little short story. I loved the story. I loved the idea behind the story. I think it was the perfect length for the story instead of having all extra ramble. Yeah, I think it was well written. I enjoyed it, but it also at the same time wasn't amazing. So I only gave that one 3 stars as well. The next book I finished was The Bone Tree by Irana Narawa. I gave this 4 stars. I loved this, but at the same time I found it, I don't know, difficult to read. This story follows 2 Maori brothers who have lost their parents and are trying, well, the eldest one is trying to keep the youngest one out of the hands of child protection. And they find family they didn't know existed, and which none of that is a spoiler. You figure all of that out just from the blurb on the back of the book. But it was good. It was a good book. It just wasn't a phenomenal book. I would be very interested in reading more of Aran and Aroa's books just to see what they're like. But if you're interested in contemporary fiction, that would be, I think, a good book for you to read, especially if you're interested in like Indigenous peoples or like First Peoples stories. It's an eye-opener for sure. The next book I had such high hopes for this book. It was The House in the Cerillion Sea by TJ Klune. I gave this 1 star. It was just a disappointment to me. It kind of reminded me of just a really poorly written Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children. That's how I described it on Instagram when I did a review for it. Not that I've read that book, but I have seen the movie, which I'm sure is probably nothing like the book. But I don't know, it was just a disappointment. The characters were boring. Everything felt forced. The story was not interesting to me, and it was just a disappointment, unfortunately. The next book that I finished was Stalking Jack the Ripper by Carrie Maniscalco. I kind of had high hopes for this book. As a person and as a psychology student, I am really interested in like true crime and murderers and those sorts of people and why they are the way that they are and what has like shaped them to become how they are, and Jack the Ripper being one of those people who we just don't know who that is. And like there's a lot of speculation as to who Jack the Ripper was, but we're never going to actually ever know who Jack the Ripper actually was, save from someone finding like a written confession, obviously. But because of that, I find it really fascinating, like all of the stories. I think it's terrible, just to put that out there, that women died and in such horrific ways, but I also find it really fascinating that occurred at that time. And so just Jack the Ripper, just as a story, even taking the like true crime out of it, just as a story, I find a lot of the retellings of Jack the Ripper to be really interesting. This one was a disappointment, not because of the Jack the Ripper part of it, but because the main character is just Mary Sue, and to me that's a disappointment. And it's something that is like rife within the fantasy genre, where the lead character has just like all of the skills that they need and can do everything and knows everything, and there's just no hardships for them. And that's how I felt about the lead character in this one, or the main character in this story. Added to the fact that she comes from a very rich and somewhat controlling family, and the freedoms that she was afforded just don't fit in with the time. And it kind of, I think because there's just too many modern connotations that are like interjected into the story in a time where we know that wouldn't have happened, it kind of ruined it for me. I think it could have been a really good book, but it was just a disappointment for me, unfortunately. The next book that I finished was The Firm by John Grisham. I'm kind of, even though I just said I love like true crime and murderers and like all of that sort of thing, the crime genre itself, I kind of have like just this massive hangover from. So when I was younger, I had a friend who was obsessed, and I don't know if she still is, we're not friends anymore, but she was obsessed with crime and just like crime stories, and that was basically all she read. And me being the people pleaser that I am, whenever she'd be like, read this, I would read it. And so I have never enjoyed crime, not crime fiction anyway, and it's not for me. Just some genres are just not for some people. Crime is not for me. And so because of that, and because I read books that I just didn't enjoy, now I still feel those same feelings that I felt back then. And so reading this, I was just like, it literally was just like, I'm reading it again. And so I didn't enjoy it. I'm sure John Grisham is a great author, just not for me. And the final book that I finished in November was The Quiet Tenant by Clemence Michelon. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. This was amazing. Normally with thriller murder mystery books, you're waiting to find out who the bad guy is. You know from the start in this one who the bad guy is, but it still has such a good twist at the end. I could not read this book fast enough. I actually was reading this book while cooking dinner, and it nearly ended up in our food because I was not paying attention to what I was doing, and so I'm now obviously banned from reading while cooking. It's a self-ban, because I don't want to risk damaging any books. My books, all library books, but I couldn't put it down. I had to read it, and I couldn't finish it fast enough. It was just so good. So that was another 5-star read. I think I actually ended up having 7 5-star reads. So that was my final book for November. It ended up being 18 books. Like I said, there was an average star rating of like 3.8 stars. I couldn't tell you how many pages I read. That was not something that I actually kept track of. But if it's something that you're interested in, or if like my reading stats are something that you're interested in, that is something I can look at doing in the future. As always, if you have any book recommendations, I would love to hear them. Like, share and subscribe if you like my videos, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye!